My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 4 years, I believed that loving someone meant absorbing everything they left behind, including the people who never wanted you there in the first place. That belief cost me more, with a check I had written myself sitting in the center of the table, like evidence at a trial. My husband Daniel passed away 14 months before that afternoon. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, the kind that gives you 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. We had been married for 2 years when they found it. 2 years of building something that suddenly had a deadline we didn't choose. I spent those final months sleeping in hospital chairs, learning how to read his oxygen levels, and holding his hand through nights that lasted longer than days should. I did not leave his side, not once. His family was there too, in the way that people are present without actually being present. His mother, who I had always called by her first name, because she never offered anything warmer, floated in and out of the hospital room like she was making appearances at an event. His older brother treated every visit like a logistics meeting. His younger sister cried loudly in hallways and then checked her phone while Daniel slept. I noticed. I didn't say anything because Daniel loved them, and Daniel was dying, and none of my feelings were the point. When he passed, I was the one who called the funeral home. I was the one who sorted his paperwork, answered the condolence emails, chose the flowers, and stood at the door greeting people I had never met who knew my husband longer than I had. I did all of it because it needed to be done, and because staying busy was the only way I knew how to breathe. 3 weeks after the funeral, his mother sat across from me in the kitchen of the house Daniel and I had shared and told me she thought it would be best if I started looking for my own place. She said it quietly, like she was doing me a favor, like she was the one being generous. The house, she explained, had always been intended to stay in the family. I was too tired to fight, too hollowed out to remind her that I was his family, that I had been his family. So I nodded and started packing boxes while she watched from the doorway, with her arms folded across her chest. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away, splitting the rent with a coworker who needed a roommate. I took my clothes, my books, the cast iron pan Daniel had bought me for our first anniversary, and very little else. The furniture we had chosen together stayed. The photographs on the mantel stayed. Even the small succulent I had nursed back from near death on the kitchen windowsill stayed, because when I reached for it on my way out, his mother said, without looking up from her phone, that she thought it looked nice there. I let it go. I let almost everything go. Because that is what grief does to you, when no one is telling you that you are allowed to hold on. For the next year, I quietly paid for things I was never asked to pay for. I covered the catering for Daniel's memorial gathering, because his brother forgot to call the restaurant and the deposit was going to be lost. I paid for the headstone engraving because there was a miscommunication about who was handling it and his mother called me crying the day before the deadline. I transferred money for the estate lawyer's initial consultation because the retainer was due and apparently no one else had liquidity that week. Each time, I was thanked briefly and then forgotten. I told myself it was for Daniel, that it was the last way I could take care of something that mattered to him. But the transfers kept coming, and the gratitude kept shrinking, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I stopped feeling like a widow and started feeling like a resource. The Sunday everything broke open started normally enough. His mother had invited the family for lunch, which happened every few months, and always left me feeling slightly invisible. I drove over because I still showed up to things, because showing up had become its own kind of stubbornness. I brought a pie I had made from scratch, the kind Daniel used to request for his birthday, because some habits are harder to unlearn than others. No one commented on the pie. It was placed on the counter and left there. Partway through lunch, his brother pulled out a folder and set it on the table between the bread basket and the serving spoon. He said there was something the family needed to discuss. He said it the way people say things when the decision has already been made and the discussion is just a formality. The folder contained a document, a summary of the estate as it currently stood, and a proposal for how the remaining assets should be divided. Daniel had left a modest retirement account, a small savings fund, and a life insurance policy. According to the document his brother had prepared, all 3 were being directed into a family trust. My name was not in the document. I sat very still for a moment, looking at the pages. Then I looked up and said, calmly, that I believed I was the named beneficiary on the life insurance policy. Daniel and I had discussed it. I had seen the form. His mother set down her fork. She said that the policy had been updated, that Daniel had intended to revise things once the estate planning was further along, that these were sensitive matters and perhaps I should speak with the lawyer rather than making assumptions at the table. His sister said nothing. She was looking at the table. His brother said, not unkindly, that they understood this was difficult, that they hoped I knew how much Daniel had cared for me, that this was not personal. I looked around the table at 4 people who had accepted my checks, eaten my pie, and absorbed 4 years of my silence. And then something inside me went very quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes before crying, the kind that comes before a decision. I picked up my bag. I said I would be in touch. I walked to the front door and let myself out, without waiting to see if anyone followed. I sat in my car in the driveway for several minutes, without starting the engine. My hands were on the steering wheel, and my vision had gone slightly strange at the edges, the way it does when your body is experiencing something your mind has not yet fully processed. I was not crying. I was calculating, trying to remember every form I had ever signed, every conversation Daniel and I had ever had about the future, every piece of paper I had touched in those final months. I was reaching for my phone to call my sister when there was a knock on the passenger window. I startled so hard my elbow hit the horn. Standing outside the car was a woman I did not recognize. She was somewhere in her 50s, wearing a gray wool coat and holding a leather portfolio against her chest. Her expression was composed, not aggressive, not warm, just professional, in a way that felt deliberate. She held up one hand, palm out, in a gesture that clearly meant I'm not a threat. I rolled down the window 2 inches. "Mrs. Donovan," she said. Her voice was unhurried. "My name is Patricia Gaines. I'm an attorney. I represent the interests of your late husband's estate, the original estate. I've been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. She paused. "I think you need to see something before you leave." I stared at her for a long moment. 6 weeks. I had changed my phone number 3 months ago after the calls from the collection agency for a debt that turned out to be under Daniel's brother's name, resolved after 2 weeks of confusion I had not caused. The forwarding had been inconsistent. I unlocked the passenger door. She sat down carefully, the portfolio in her lap, and did not immediately speak. Instead, she looked at the house through the windshield for a moment, then back at me. "Before I say anything else," she said, "I want you to know that what I'm about to share is documented, verified, and supported by a court filing that has already been initiated. I am not asking you to take my word for anything." She opened the portfolio. Inside, clipped neatly to the left side, was a copy of a life insurance policy. My name was on it. Below that, a document I didn't recognize at first until I saw the date. It was signed 11 days before Daniel died. His signature at the bottom, shakier than his usual hand, but unmistakably his. "This is the original policy designation," Patricia said. "It was never legally changed. The revision his family is referencing was a draft. It was never executed, never witnessed, never filed. Legally, it does not exist." My throat tightened. "Then why did they?" "Because they believed you didn't know," she said simply. "And because they believed you wouldn't check." I looked down at the document in my lap. Daniel's signature, 11 days before the end. I thought about what he had been doing. 11 days before the end. I had been there. He had asked me to hand him his phone twice that week, and I had assumed he was texting old friends. The way people do when they know time is short and want to close loops. I had given him privacy, because that felt like the right thing to do. He had been closing a different kind of loop. Patricia gave me a moment. She did not rush. She did not perform sympathy. She simply waited, which was exactly the right thing to do. "There's more," she said, when I looked back up. The more was this. Daniel had also drafted a letter, handwritten, kept with his attorney's office, and not with the household files his family had access to. In it, he explained that he was aware his family would likely challenge the estate after his death. He knew them. He had known them his entire life. He had taken steps specifically because he knew them. The letter named Patricia Gaines as the attorney with custody of the original documents. It included a line I had to read twice before I believed it was real. He wrote, "Rachel will not fight for herself unless someone hands her the reason to. Please make sure she gets the reason." I had to put the paper down for a minute. Patricia waited again. Outside, a car passed slowly on the residential street. The house in front of us sat quiet. I wondered if they were watching from a window. I didn't turn to look. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we respond to the filing they initiated, which, as of this morning, has already been answered. The original policy designation stands. The retirement account beneficiary form, which also names you, was never altered either. His brother had access to some of the estate paperwork, but not to the documents held by my office." She paused. "They made the mistake of assuming the only copies were the ones they could find." I thought about the folder on the dining room table, the way it had been presented with such confidence, the way his brother had used the word family like it was a door, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. "They don't know," I said. "They don't know yet," Patricia confirmed. I asked her how Daniel had found her. She said he had reached out through a referral, a colleague of his from work, someone who had gone through a difficult probate situation and knew what careful looked like. Daniel had met with Patricia 4 times over the last month of his life, during hours I thought were physical therapy consultations. He had not told me because he did not want me carrying the weight of a fight he hoped wouldn't be necessary. He had prepared for it anyway because he was the kind of person who planned for the possibility without borrowing the grief of it in advance. I had known that about him. I had loved that about him. Sitting in the car in his mother's driveway, reading a letter a dying man had written to make sure I wouldn't be left with nothing, I felt 2 things at once. The grief came back in a single clean wave. Not the slow underwater kind I had been living in, but something sharper and more clarifying, and underneath it, something else. A resolve I hadn't felt in 14 months. The specific kind of resolve that comes when you finally understand that the thing you kept giving the benefit of the doubt to was never confused, it was calculated. Patricia and I sat in that driveway for another 40 minutes. She walked me through the timeline, the documents, and what the next steps looked like. I asked questions I had not known I needed to ask until that afternoon. She answered each one completely, without making me feel foolish for not having known sooner. Before I started the car, she said one more thing. She said that Daniel had specifically asked her to tell me, when she found me, that he was sorry it took this shape, that he had wanted to handle it more cleanly, that he had run out of time. I nodded. I told her he always hated leaving things unfinished. She smiled for the first time. "That's almost exactly what he said about you." I drove home a different way than I came, not for any practical reason, just because I needed the extra minutes. I needed to sit with what had shifted before I walked back into my apartment and made the calls that would begin the next part. My sister picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the particular certainty she reserves for things she has suspected for a long time, "I knew something was off about that family." I told her she was not wrong. Over the following weeks, Patricia moved through the legal process, the way an experienced attorney does, methodically, and without drama, which is more effective than drama almost every time. The life insurance claim was submitted with the original beneficiary documentation. The retirement account transfer was initiated. Every step was clean, documented, and supported by paperwork that had been preserved specifically so it could not be contested without evidence of wrongdoing on the contesting party's part. His brother hired his own attorney. There was a period of letters and responses and filings, the kind of back and forth that is designed to feel overwhelming to someone without representation. I had representation. I let Patricia handle the correspondence. My job was to show up when needed, and to stop apologizing for existing in the space Daniel had made for me. His mother called once. She left a voicemail that started with how much the family had always cared for me, and ended with a suggestion that perhaps a conversation between us could resolve things without the courts needing to be involved. Her voice was steady and practiced. I listened to the message twice, then forwarded it to Patricia, who noted it was useful and archived it. I did not call her back. There was a mediation session in the 5th week. I sat across a conference table from his brother, who had brought his attorney and a folder of his own. His expression when Patricia laid out the documentation was the one that people make when they realize the narrative they constructed has a hole in it they cannot explain away. He tried anyway. He suggested there had been a communication error. He referenced Daniel's intentions in a way that required everyone present to simply take his word for it, which was, as Patricia noted without raising her voice, not how intent is determined in probate proceedings. The mediator asked his brother if he had documentation of the alleged revision. He had a draft, unsigned, unwitnessed, undated in a way that was inconsistent with the office software that created it, a detail Patricia raised quietly, and the mediator noted carefully. The session ended without resolution on his brother's end, which meant the original filings stood. By the time the final determination came through, the contested period had lasted 9 weeks. It felt longer from the inside. There were nights when I lay awake running through what I could have done differently in the months after Daniel died, whether I should have asked more questions sooner, pushed back earlier, been less accommodating in ways that may have read as permission. Patricia told me, when I raised this with her, that people in grief make accommodations that are reasonable under grief. She said the failure was not mine. I am still practicing, believing that fully. The life insurance paid out, the retirement account transferred. It was not a fortune, but it was what Daniel had meant for me to have a floor, not a ceiling. Enough to stop splitting rent with a coworker. Enough to finish the graduate certificate program I had deferred twice because the timing never felt right. Enough to breathe at a pace that didn't feel like survival. I found a small house to rent about 40 minutes from where I had been. First floor, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window above the sink that gets morning light. I brought the cast iron pan. I bought a new succulent, small and slightly uneven, and put it on the windowsill where it could catch the sun. His family did not reach out again after the mediation. His sister sent a text message 2 months later that said she hoped I was doing okay and that she wished things had gone differently. I thought about it for a day, and then I replied simply that I hoped she was well. That was all I had for her. Not anger, not warmth, just the flat surface of an ending. I think about Daniel often, in the way you think about someone who shaped you without it ever being their intention to do so. He knew who his family was. He prepared for it quietly, and without making it my burden to carry while he was still alive. That is one of the most loving things anyone has ever done for me, and I am still learning how to accept that I deserved it. What I know now, that I did not know 14 months ago sitting in a hospital chair memorizing the rhythm of a machine, is this: grief does not make you obligated. It does not make you responsible for the comfort of people who were never comfortable with your presence. It does not require you to sign documents you should have read, or leave rooms you were invited to stay in, or let go of succulents that were yours. The people who love you will make sure you have the reason to hold on. Your job is to hold on when it arrives. If you are watching this, and you have been told, directly or quietly, that your place in someone's life was conditional, that your belonging had a price, and you were the only one expected to pay it, I want you to hear me say this: the documentation exists. The proof is findable. And there are people who will sit in the passenger seat of your car in a driveway and hand you back what was always yours. You are not the draft that was never filed. You are the original. Tell me in the comments, what is one thing someone told you that you have learned to stop believing? And have you ever had someone show up at exactly the moment you needed them to? Drop it below. I read every single one.